All games have graphics, naturally being the only type of media where you can directly interact with it and have the computer visualize what you're doing and keep track of score for you, only limiting your inputs to the rules and the environment set by the developers of games is what made them stand out, and it's what made the industry like shoot up to a multi-trillion dollar industry. Well, at least video games. I'm sure when people think of games in general, they don't think of like old school text based RPG type games. But it is clear that like the interactivity is what made people drawn to video games even before we figured out how to visualize them. And once we streamline like how inputting works and how the game should respond to the user's like actions no matter what kind of genre it is, all there's really left to do is to see how well you can visualize it and how realistic you can get it. And I mean, it obviously makes sense. We only went from like 2D to 3D, and you can't really add more dimensions past that unless you like exclude things like VR and being able to like move around the world, which is just a completely different thing other than just pure graphic like fidelity. I'm going to exclude talking about VR pretty much in this whole video because I don't own a VR headset and I've only used it a couple of times, but by nature, VR isn't going to be completely efficient and up with the curve of like graphics and gaming. It's a new thing and you have to generate basically two images and you have to run them at like a pretty high frame rate, so optimization matters more than anything else on VR. And it kind of makes sense, like they're still in the stage of where they have to like see how much they can squeeze out of the current technology, because it's a new kind of like way to visualize games. But games as we know them, like just regular games that you would view on a monitor or a TV, that's the whole thing that sets this type of media apart from anything else. And it's weird how like graphics in games have just been kind of set aside, and like they hit a point of good enough. And don't get me wrong, games still are advancing, and there are games with graphics that are constantly pushing the boundaries of the technology that's available in the market right now. You would think that as the industry became more accepted and more people started playing video games, to the point where it laps the film industry and the amount of money that it brings in, you would think that more people playing games would mean more studios would release them and it would be more competitive. But the bigger market would mean they'd all have like bigger budgets, especially the ones at the top, and they'd be like leading the industry, constantly making breakthroughs and trying to push their graphics to the limit to stay ahead. But it seems like as video games had the factor that makes them stand out, like interactivity, and that players can play them over and over again and do different things, and developers were always trying to find out new ways to like make graphics or new optimized ways to like make the same graphics run on worse hardware. It seems that the executives found out that games also stand out in the sense that you can make money off of them continually and you can wring people out of every last dime years after the game released. And it seems like instead of trying to squeeze every last bit of performance and visual fidelity out of games and seeing how many customers you can bring in, the industry is more about seeing the lowest common denominator that you can appeal to and making a game that's just good enough to be impressive, but to run on as many devices as possible and to keep customers like hooked on the game for as long as possible to keep the money coming in. And I mean, in a sense, it makes sense to like not waste a bunch of money developing a new groundbreaking game that people just might not click with, and you wasted millions and millions of dollars, researching and developing and pouring work hours into this game. But we're hardly ever seeing incremental improvements. It just seems like we've reached a point where everybody was like, oh, well, it looks realistic enough, and everything's kind of gone stagnant since. And I mean, it makes sense. Like, why would you waste money trying to develop something that you're not even 100% sure is going to sell when you could just sell something that you already know is going to sell because you sold it before and just slightly improve the graphics, and you don't even have to like change anything to improve the graphics if a new console releases or the hardware just increases because it's been a while. You can just port, whatever game it is onto a new console and throw on some new textures and maybe increase the frame rate if you're lucky. And I mean, the jump back then was crazy. It must have been an insane time to be alive and see like how much graphics advance, and every new adaptation, people are like, "Oh, this is the best it gets. This is basically real life." And then it keeps getting better. Like in 1983, they released Super Mario Bros. And the bar was set pretty low. This game completely blew up because it was the first video game that like actually didn't look like a bunch of dots and lines on the screen, and you didn't have to be a huge nerd to play it and pull out like a pen and paper and keep track of a bunch of stuff. And it seemed pretty simple. You just have to make an environment and give the player a little bit of freedom, but add enough rules and a goal so there's a purpose. And for a while, they did only get better. And 10 years later, Doom released, and many people thought that this would be the peak of graphics because they added an entirely new dimension, and it doesn't look like traditional 3D graphics. I mean, no 3D game today, aside from some like indie games that use it as just a visual style to stand out, none of them look like this. And the reason is because they basically had to use visual illusions and magic tricks to actually get you to like believe it was 3D. The game has a bunch of layered 2D textures, and it kind of sort of looks like 3D. And at the time, nobody seen anything like it, so it did look incredibly realistic, like relative to other computer graphics. And the fact that it was in full color and it was 3D and it was like live and responsive, people thought that this was as close as you're going to get to simulating reality. But then eventually we found out better ways to actually process 3D and not layer a bunch of stuff to make everything appear 3D, sort of like comparing like a rotoscope to CGI. And then 10 years after that, we had games like the first Call of Duty and San Andreas release, both from series that basically like defined the genre that they're in, and had a bunch of games trying to get success off of copying them. Now, these games are cheap knockoffs of themselves. I mean, Call of Duty and GTA keep either rebooting or just re releasing their old games and somehow making them worse. And I mean, it makes sense. Technology was constantly advancing and at an exponential rate back then. I'm sure you've all heard of Moore's Law, how like the number of transistors in a given, surface area doubles every 2 years or so. And recently that's starting to slow down to a crawl, and technology like isn't really advancing as fast, but it's still like advancing really consistently. Like it is noticeable. Like if you look at GTA launch like in 2013, and you look at like now, you see like Red Dead Redemption 2, like just from the same studio, it's clear like yeah, there are graphical advances and they do happen like at a noticeable rate, but it seems like that they're just trying to like get the numbers up a little bit, and we're like, "Oh wow, now we have 4K 60 now," or we have like some gimmick like ray tracing that was kind of abandoned by Nvidia. It was originally supposed to be something that would fundamentally innovate the gaming industry and redo the way computers calculate lighting so it's like as realistic as possible. And now it's just something that they throw into a AAA game like right at the end if they can, if they like, feel like it and they have spare time. And it'll completely take your performance because they don't feel like actually taking the time to fully test and implement it. A lot of things now are just done to like give them a good selling point or to look good in the trailer, or things that might completely look good on paper but in practice they're just complete shit, and it's like a waste of time and resources. Like even with technology physically slowing down in terms of getting better, like the Moore's Law thing coming to an end, games could still get better no matter what. There's always a reason to like optimize these games so they would run better with the current hardware, or you can release the same game on a wider variety of hardware and sell it to a way bigger demographic. Or they could focus on pushing out the most frames or the biggest number of pixels. Like 560 hertz monitors already exist. They're not huge on the market, but there's no reason to not have more frames, especially when a lot of games are like competitive. But even in single player games, I'm pretty sure most people would rather not pick between like 4K or like minimum 144 hertz. Like 4K 60 shouldn't just be the industry standard, and then once we hit it, every company is just like, okay, good enough. The average consumer doesn't really know the difference, so there's really no point in appealing to them. Like, it obviously made sense back then to not completely try to get every last drop of performance out of every piece of hardware back then, because, like, in 2 or 3 years, everything is going to be completely outdated, and whatever technology and games they have then is going to blow everything way the fuck out of the water. And with how much slower things are advancing nowadays, you would think most people would be on the other side of the curve. But with how much shit is half-assed, most consumers just naturally come to the conclusion that it's probably not worth it to upgrade their hardware, especially if it's only within a cycle or two. It's not usually worth it to spend the hundreds of dollars that you spent on your GPU and to just let it go to waste and let it collect dust, or maybe try to sell it on eBay or Craigslist or some shit and then have to deal with shady people and getting lowballed. Like, they've basically become like iPhones, where they just release them every so often just to say that, yeah, we're still a company, we release products. But, like, it's really not ever worth it to upgrade every single cycle. Like, you might wait until like the third series from the one you're on to actually upgrade, because then the one that you have is currently falling apart and the actual performance upgrade is completely noticeable. And then these companies see these statistics, and they're like, okay, well, our demographic hardly ever upgrades their systems and is not likely to be using the latest shit, but a lot of people are, so we need to implement some features to make them feel like our game is worth playing if they have like a newer GPU. We don't want to be left in the dust, so we're just going to throw in some like RTX, and then instead of actually optimizing the RTX, we're also just going to throw in DLSS and act like we're doing you a favor. And then they also have to make the game work on a huge variety of cards and system configurations going back years and years and years. And then boom, nobody wins except the Nvidia executives that only care about the amount of cards being sold. And, well, I mean, where else are you going to go for a GPU? So, they're always going to win. And the people at the game studios who care about how much profit the game makes, which doesn't necessarily correlate with the amount of sales or how good a game is. And you might be thinking, well, if people don't upgrade their GPUs, eventually Nvidia is just gonna not get any sales and they're gonna lose money and they're gonna have to change something. But it's Nvidia and they practically have like a monopoly in the market share. I'm pretty sure it's like 90 to 10%. And AMD doesn't really have that much of a chance. So when people are gonna eventually start upgrading their cards, people are just gonna start buying all the old 4080s, and all the people that bought the 4080 immediately are just gonna buy the 5080, and it's just gonna be like the same system of people buying them and scalpers buying them and then reselling them over time, or people just buying them secondhand that don't care about having the new shiniest GPU or whatever. Other than the people selling them are just going to use that money to buy the new shiny GPU that Nvidia releases. And that's how their stock prices stay up, because they like trick people into thinking that their cards are way more valuable than they actually are. Like, I think they realized during COVID that the shortage made them so valuable, because they're a commodity, and if there's less of a commodity, then the value has to go up, because I mean, there's always going to be someone that needs a GPU. And if the best GPUs on the consumer market aren't, the best that you could possibly produce, but you're able to get the margins down pretty good and, incrementally improve them enough for people to have a reason to buy them, then you're just going to make a shit ton of money. And on top of that, that's only like half of it. But the main reason why gaming pretty much doesn't seem to make any sense is because a lot of those Nvidia sales aren't coming from gaming. That's not the target demographic, and that's why their cards aren't really appealing to gamers anymore, and people are holding on to their old cards, because a lot of Nvidia's like worth is being subsidized by AI companies. And it makes sense. Instead of being in an industry that's, stood the test of time, has been around and has been fine-tuned for a while, so you have to sell a good product to get good sales. you might as well just step into an industry where they're having a bunch of angel investors. Everything is so new, there's so many kinds of cash grabs. And you just tell them, well, if you want to be the next big open AI level Fortune 500 AI company, you just need as many goddamn NVIDIA GPUs as possible so you have the best, most advanced, powerful AI. And it doesn't matter if 75% of those AI companies implode in the next 5 years or so, because, like, the investors wouldn't come in if they weren't able to, like, prove that they have an AI that might be the next OpenAI or ChatGPT. And to do that, they need a really, really powerful server to run the model on. So NVIDIA is pretty much always the first step in the door for the entire AI industry. So basically, it's a chain reaction where NVIDIA doesn't make it worthwhile for any of the developers to fully implement their technology, and the game companies don't make it worthwhile for the customers to actually buy the game. But that's all right, because they might just re-release their old games 50 times. So if you don't want to buy the new slop, well, then they're just gonna completely nostalgia bait you and get your money anyway from a game that they already made and just slightly polished up. And the customers aren't always falling for the hype and running out to throw their 3000 series in the trash and buy the 4090s. But that's all right, because Nvidia knows that there's going to be opportunists that buy up all of them anyway, so they still get all their sales. And people think that the cards are worth a lot more than they actually are, or they know how much they're worth, but they're still willing to pay an exorbitant amount because they think that they're completely rare and it might make them stand out, or they might be able to resell it to the next sucker, or whatever have you. And then Nvidia can say, well, we're not overcharging for our cards. You guys are willing to pay like $4,000 for one. And I hate how they're completely right, because instead of like realizing people don't need this needless shit and they could just vote with their wallet, people are just susceptible to hype and clout. Like the big companies that were very competitive and released genuinely great products or services, like Nvidia, Microsoft, or Steam, all of them have spent the past decade or two just seeing how far they can go with being anti-consumer and squeezing people out of as much money as they can and releasing the most half-assed bullshit that they can. And they did a pretty good job. Like, they managed to find the sweet spot where people are just willing to put up with it. Like, you know what they say, work smarter, not harder. But if you have like pretty much zero competition, you don't even have to work. You just have to make people believe that you are. Isn't it weird how back then, when every big game pretty much ran on renderware, like pretty much half the market, games still looked like renderware games still looked vastly different from each other. And like you could tell, like games that were just released a couple of parts completely looked different graphically. All these companies were very competitive, and all of them were trying to find ways to just completely, outperform them technically, or to stand out and add new features, or to have a completely different art style. Once the gaming industry became too big to possibly fail, and all of the companies that people used to love became like completely comfortable and they were already ingrained in the gaming industry, they just stopped focusing on making good games and tried to focus on how to make alright games, bring in as many players as possible, and then try to squeeze them for every last dollar. Like, why would you try to make the game as good as it can possibly be when you could spend half the budget and potentially make 4 times the amount if you just remove some of the content and then resell it as DLC? Or why would we try to ever release a game without a battle pass and something for people to always consistently dump money into? I mean, it makes sense if you just spend a lot of the money, like a majority of it that you would have spent actually developing the game, and then you just heavily market it, and until you develop enough games to where one of them eventually does land and it does become like a long running staple that people are just constantly fucking turning their wallets inside out just to get a skin, like CSGO, or like a lot of the gacha games like MapleStory and shit. then you're pretty much set. Like your company is set for the next 20 years and you just have to sit back and then just add some occasional bullshit slop every couple of months. And the ones that see right through that kind of shit are just gonna like go back and play their old games that they already own and that already are better than the newer games that are being released because somehow they're getting worse. So they're like, oh, okay, well, you want to play that game? Literally, they're just gonna be like, okay, we're gonna resell our old games for $60 again, and they completely keep winning every time because newer studios don't have the budget to put into like a groundbreaking game that can sell just off of how impressive it is, and they don't have the type of marketing to get people to actually fall for some slot bullshit game because I mean there's always going to be some that are just slightly better and more addicting from the big studios. And these big studios found out like they're basically competing with their old games from the people that are smart enough to see right through the bullshit and they just want to play games that are fun. So they're like, "Oh, okay, well, we're just going to resell our old games for another $60 and you know, barely touch them up a little bit, but your dumbass is still gonna buy it." And then people do, and they also have the resources to just buy out any of their competitors and then just immediately turn around and shut down the studio. So there's just a smaller pool of games from people to pick from. So it really is kind of hard to be a new developer because if you try too hard, you're just gonna go bankrupt. If you don't try hard enough, well, people are just gonna go back to playing Fortnite and COD. And despite all of that, you do manage to make like a breakthrough hit indie game. They're gonna buy out your studio for an offer that is like unbelievably hard to refuse and then immediately shut it down. Or they're gonna sue you into oblivion and try to claim that you took some like basic fucking technology and then they're gonna sue you into oblivion using the best lawyers. You know, they have the resources to make sure that all of this happens in the right court that they want, in the right state with the right judge. And then they're always gonna win because they have more money and courts are typically run by older people who don't really understand technology. So it's really easy for a large company to just outright lie. And then once that precedent is set, then they can just continue to do that forever and ever. And if anybody tries to sue them, they'll be like, nope, this has already happened before and they've already decided. Or if they can't like completely sue you into the fucking ground, they're just gonna steal from you. And then there's nothing you can do because you don't have those kind of resources. Like honestly, it must suck to be a new developer. Like if you're not being protected by some big publisher that is just going to completely kill your vision and turn it into a slot machine, then you're pretty much screwed. I mean, if I owned a big company like Microsoft, obviously, who wouldn't pick, spending way less money on games, operating within a way lower margin, and getting such a huge profit back, and then you just spend that money keeping all of your competition down and keeping the laws so you can keep doing the same scummy bullshit. And I feel like eventually something will change and it'll force a huge change in the gaming industry and people will see through all the bullshit that, companies do now. But I feel like with how, ingrained these big companies are and how much they've basically changed what gaming is, when it does happen, they're going to make sure that they're set up so that it only disproportionately affects the smaller studios. And the bigger studios that are actually the ones ruining gaming aren't going to be affected at all. If, they are forced to make a decent game, they're just going to be like, oh, okay, fine. People want to play something that works, I guess. We'll just pour in another $100 million or whatever. Or they're just going to use one of their old IPs and do some nostalgia bait. Or just buy a better game studio that is actually more likable, and then they're just gonna hide behind that. Like, honestly, there is no fucking losing for Microsoft. They're just gonna completely ruin gaming. I mean, like, the entire video, I forgot to bring up, like, the Xbox. Like, I forgot how Microsoft used to mainly make money in the gaming industry off of hardware. But now they just buy game studios and try to find out ways to like monetize their games and get every last cent out of them instead of actually selling Xboxes. Like honestly, every time Microsoft invents a new scummy way of making extra money, and people can clearly see like the value that they're missing out on by just looking at a competitor, like how they released Xbox Gold, and people were like, well, why the hell would I want to buy Xbox Gold when I can just be on a PS3 and play online for free, or PC? Well, then the next generation, every single console had fucking paid online, including the Switch. Or how they're like the first to like re-release a slim version of the console and make people think that it's just worth buying the same console twice when they all run the same games. It's like when Microsoft did the whole Internet Explorer thing and they almost got a little bit shook up by the US government. They took it as a challenge. They're like, fuck it. We're going to do the most evil, greedy things right in people's faces. And we're going to do it so well that the entire industry is just going to follow. Because, I mean, who could turn down like reoccurring profit, and you could potentially spend like half the money that you do on your games so you can release more games that constantly just bring in reoccurring profit from battle passes and gambling and DLCs. And people are like, well, why in the hell would I want to buy that? Like, that's obviously a worse experience designed to make more money, but eventually, over a big enough demographic and a long enough time, the companies that were designed to make more money are going to make more money and they're going to win. So, like, all of the people, like the old heads that are like, well, gaming sucks now anyway, they're just like, oh, okay, idiot. Well, here's a game we made 15 years ago for $60. Go play that if you don't want to, be sucked up into microtransactions. And the people that grew up playing slop are literally just not going to know any better. It's kind of like how there was like a generational divide, and you can tell like what age of people can see right through most like phone scams, and you're like, how in the hell would anybody fall for that? Like, obviously they are just lying to you to make it sound as appealing as possible, but like older people consistently fall for them. And then now it's starting to come back, and younger people are starting to fall for phone scams because for a while nobody was there to like put out warnings and stuff, because people are like, well, who the hell would fall for that anyway? Like, the people growing up playing games now genuinely aren't going to know how bad they have it. Like, I mean, like, back in the day, people thought games like Doom and GTA Vice City were the peak of graphics. They genuinely couldn't believe a computer could ever make an image more lifelike than that. And if you look at those now, people are like, what? Why does this look so bad? Everything is so blocky and pixelated. That's why I always hate the excuse of people who are like, oh, graphics are good enough now. Like, you can only make it look lifelike, and you can't really do any better than real life. It's like, well, first of all, we're not there, and people thought fucking Vice City was lifelike. Like, there are numbers, they can always go higher, whether it be frame rate, pixel, or just the amount of devices that the game possibly can run on. But just like how people didn't know better that like graphics could get worse, and people were fine playing games that look like San Andreas. People were excited to. But now if you have like a 8-year-old kid play San Andreas, they probably just start browsing through TikTok or something. They wouldn't even be fucking interested in it. Nowadays it'll be like, well, I can't even get interested in the game if there's no slot machine to keep my dopamine always fucking primed. Like how I genuinely can't play a game that is like locked on 30 FPS, and I hardly have a fun time playing shit on 60 because I just know how much better and how much smoother it could be and what I am missing out on. I feel like it's gonna be like that, but in the worst way, for the shitty tactics that are designed to make you think like you're having a great time. Like, a lot of game companies hire people that work on casinos to keep you always engaged. I guess that always happens in every industry. Like, kind of like social media, there was that era where people just had a blast on it, and then every social media was trying to be the best social media. And then, there's that, middle period in between where people were like, well, why in the hell would I want to be interested in Facebook because you're telling me I should? I know you're just going to sell my data and you're just using manipulative tactics to get me addicted to the app and to keep me coming back. And then the generation after that is just helplessly scrolling because, I mean, they don't even care that their information's being sold. They're like, so what? Like, once these companies stop having to release good products or maintaining a good service, and once they become too big to fail, then they just focus on squeezing every last dollar out of you. And then eventually it just becomes the norm. Like, I bet if you ask an old person, they'd probably be like, TV used to be so great. Like, if you wanted to have a successful channel, they had to see, what they could do, and they had to find out what works, and there was such a variety of stuff. But then once they all started to find their identity, all of the networks started to try following the bigger networks once the media was like completely defined and they found out what works. But then the bigger networks found out that scummy, greedy ass business practices work even better. And then all the other companies started following them. And then that just becomes the norm. But unlike TV, video games aren't going to be completely phased out by something that's just objectively better. Because, I mean, video games are such a broad thing, and it's not a specific, form of media on a specific type of device like television. Video games are completely versatile, and like as soon as the technology existed to allow video games to fucking be invented, they were, and then people immediately ate them up because it's something that no other form of media can do. And as long as technology exists, people are going to be playing video games, and as long as people are playing games, there's going to be companies looking to extract every last dollar out of people playing games. Hopefully, eventually, the people that grew up with technology and see through this greed are the ones that are putting in laws, and they make it illegal for a lot of these business practices that completely fuck up the industry. But like, no matter what time period in history you look at, all of the people in power and like in terms of like courts and lawmakers, they're always old and out of touch. And it doesn't matter what time period it is, like it's always someone that's older from another time, because they're always like, well, I don't want some fucking young ass person thinking he's smarter than me. Like, look at me, I'm old and wise. And they all have this unsigned pact where they're like, well, I'm old and I've survived this far, so I deserve some respect. And naturally, you should think that I'm smart, and you'll understand when you're old and you're also smart, and then you'll deserve some respect. But for now, I'm clearly the one that knows more about this because I've lived longer, even though I have like 0 years in the fucking gaming industry. Honestly, if I was like old as shit and I was, about to die, I would 100% like sell out for something I never have even heard of before. Like, imagine like you spend your whole entire life, you've already basically lived through your whole career, and then like just a couple of years ago some new thing pops up, but like to you, like last time you heard about it, it was just some fad, those video games at Nintendo, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember something about that. And then you're like, oh man, this fucking youngin is spending his whole career in goddamn video games. What a loser. He should spend his whole career in, law and legal shit like I do. Like, of course I'm gonna take a couple of $1 million and to decide on a fucking like, of course I'm gonna take a couple $1 million from this company to make a decision. Like, who wouldn't? Like, especially if you don't respect the industry, know hardly anything about it except from what the company that is paying you is telling you, and you're only going to see the consequence, or people are only going to see the consequences of your decision really take into place years after you're long dead. It's like, yeah, who the fuck wouldn't want like another Mercedes or extra money for their grandkids' college or whatever? Like, that's how all of these companies always win on the most brain dead decisions. Those who play dirty are always going to be ahead, on top of just always taking away from those who are just trying to release good products.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. As much as I'd like to say eventually, like, people are gonna get sick and only the good companies survive. I don't feel like it'll ever happen at this point. When you have a system that has these ingrained loopholes that only work one way for the extremely successful companies, and then you have a system that is completely built by these same companies. We're probably gonna be playing games by fucking Nintendo, and Microsoft, and Activision. Well, I guess it's a Microsoft thing, but like Rockstar, probably into the 2100s. But that's pretty much it for today. Thanks for watching, and I guess one like equals one good game that gets released in 2025.